Hey, it's Jon Fleischman with the So Does It Matter Substack on California politics. I am bringing you this direct commentary from the parking lot at Dodger Stadium, where I'm about to go watch game 5 of the World Series, where your world champion Los Angeles Dodgers will fight the Canadian team. We will see how it goes. By the time you watch this, that game will be over, and we'll know if the Dodgers are heading back to Canada for those final 2 games, needing to only take 1 game or needing to take 2 games. We'll see what happens. But I wanted to talk to you today about what's going on in Washington with the shutdown. And I know I usually talk about California politics almost exclusively, or cities within and all that. But, the federal budget has a tremendous impact on California, not to mention the fact that we have 54 politicians elected in California that have a big role to play in federal policy, 2 U.S. senators and 52 members of Congress. And so what I wanted to talk about is kind of how it works back there and what's going on. So how it works is Congress has 4 years been passing these omnibus spending bills that are grotesque and horrible. They're what we call Christmas trees. That's where the tree comes and everybody puts an ornament on the tree and weighs it down. And then you check out the whole tree at once and everybody gets what they want, except if you're a taxpayer champion or somebody who believes in fiscal conservatism, because nowhere on the ornament is anybody spending any less. It's everybody larding it up with their spending priorities. And Congress has been doing that for a long time. And in between doing that, they pass what are called continuing resolutions. And that's where you basically say, we are going to continue to fund government for a certain period of time at the same level that it's been funded, with whatever caveats are thrown into the bill. We're going to add this, we're going to add that. They're never really subtracting anything on a continuing resolution. So what happened is they said, we need more time to get to regular order, so we need a continuing resolution. Regular order, you say, what is that? Well, if everything is working right in Congress the way they want Congress to work, all of the spending that makes up the federal budget would actually happen in tranches, where each of these policy areas and appropriations committees, they get together and they pick each area and they pass a bill for funding that particular chunk of the government. And then those bills go to the other chamber. They have to originate in the House. The Constitution provides that all spending has to originate in the people's house. And then eventually there's a conference committee, and then that eventually all goes off to the president for a signature or a veto. Theoretically, they say that a return to regular order will institute fiscal sanity. I don't buy it. It's another way to pass spending bills, but fiscal sanity is only going to surface if the folks in Congress actually wake up and realize that the massive national debt is a chokehold on our children and their children and their children, and we owe it to them to pay it down and get our bills in order. I mean, our national debt is set to continue to go up, 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 and it needs to go down. Anyways, getting back to it, there's supposed to be a continuing resolution passed, or that's what the House Republicans want, to buy time to get things through regular order. That's not really the way that it's gone down. So what's going on is Republicans put up what they call a clean continuing resolution. That means that for their purposes, all it does is continue government spending at its current rate. And I think they said it for 7 weeks, and then they passed it, and they got out of Dodge. Then they haven't been back in like 4 or 5 weeks. So by the time anything happens, there's going to need to be a new continuing resolution anyway, because the one that they're looking at was set to expire in a couple weeks by now, 2.5 weeks. So they pass this, they leave town, and the Republicans in the Senate are ready to pass it. But over on the Senate side, in order to have cloture and have a debate, you have to get around a filibuster. And a filibuster is when, in this case, the Democrats hold up keeping you from having 60 votes, which is what's needed to move on a policy debate. We can have another whole discussion about the cloture rule and whether it continues to be a good or a bad idea. Hint, I think it's a bad idea and we ought to get rid of the thing, but there's a lot of mixed opinions about that. Nevertheless, Democrats will not put up the votes because there's something they want. But before I talk about what the Democrats want, I want to make sure that everybody understands a very significant thing, which is for a Republican Republican president, Republican Senate, and a Republican House to offer up a continuing resolution that, in essence, maintains Biden-level spending all across the government, post-COVID level, high levels of spending. That is a huge concession for Republicans. I guarantee you most Republicans really bit their tongue when they agreed to do that, and that's why it's probably such a short-term measure. Republicans really want to shrink the spending, or a lot of them in the House. So there's already been a lot of compromise internally in the Republican conference just to generate a clean CR. Then it comes over and the Democrats huddle. Politically, they're not anxious to give Republicans a win. And also politically, this is really the first thing that's come along that gives them a leverage point, because since 60 votes are required to get something out of the Senate, and Republicans only have, I think, 52 votes, that means you got to get eight Republican senators. I guess you could have 53 with the vice president, but you need all these Democrat senators to come over and vote with you. And on each of these votes, there's been like a dozen votes to pass the clean CR. Some of them have gotten Democrat votes. Some of those votes have not. None of them have come close to getting the ones that they need. And what is it that Chuck Schumer, the Democrat leader in the Senate, and Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat leader in Congress, have said that they want in order to pass a clean CR? Well, they want a return to cuts that were made in Obamacare spending that took place in the One Big Beautiful Bill back on July 4th. And so that what they're basically saying is, we're not willing to reopen the government. We're not willing to end the shutdown unless you're willing to add this spending that was cut earlier in the year back into the budget. And so it's worth talking about what is it that they want to bring back? Because I think this context is very, very important. They want to restore these funding cuts from the One Big Beautiful Bill, but in reality, they're trying to make COVID-era spending increases, subsidies, permanent. And let me go on to say, during COVID, a lot of money got spent by the government and all got put on the debt in order to help people out, because the government had ordered all these shutdowns. Businesses closed. People were not working. And so one of the things that they did at the time was they said, you know what? During this time when a lot of people aren't working, we're going to have the federal government subsidize people that are on the Obamacare policies, people that are, getting federal government subsidies for the healthcare. We're going to bump it up considerably. So we're going to bring down the cost of that healthcare. And so they did that. And then, of course, the COVID epidemic ended. And rather than bringing those subsidies back down to their pre-COVID level, they actually tucked into the all-Democrat passed Inflation Reduction Act, as it was called, an extension of those subsidies. So after the COVID disaster ended, after the subsidies don't go down, they get extended because, as they say, spending never goes away. And of course, the agenda for the Democrats was never about temporary funding. They wanted it to be permanent. So then during the rescission process earlier this year, and that was used for the One Big Beautiful Bill, Republicans put up the votes to end the subsidies. This became significant because Republicans needed to come up with money to both pay for extending the tax cuts that were due to expire, as well as some military spending, and try to bring down at least the increase in the deficit spending. And so what kind of money are we talking about? Well, the Congressional Budget Office says that these subsidies that are in question, if you were to bring them back, would add between $300 and $400 billion in federal spending between now and a decade from now. That's a lot of spending. And because those cuts are already in place and they're already the law, it's new spending. So you're talking about new deficit spending. But the reality is, and I'm looking at my watch, November 1 is when a lot of these cuts start to go into place. And so the people that are benefiting from these programs that are being cut are largely upper middle income exchange buyers, middle class exchange buyers, not the poorest people. Those folks already have Medicaid. This program, the Obamacare program, is to try to help kind of people in the middle. But it's a bad idea for a lot of reasons. The first thing it does is, again, it would bring back and lock in pandemic level subsidies that were added because of the COVID pandemic. So that's a bad idea. Obviously, it increases more dependency on federal handouts. And one of the things that we're going to discover is the way out of this big federal debt that we're in is going to be a retreating of the federal government from a lot of these kinds of subsidies and welfare spending, and returning that either back to the cities or deciding that that's not something that government's going to do anymore. I'm sorry, back to the states and counties and cities. And so you're going to see a lot of states wrangling with whether or not they want to continue these programs. Every state has the independent ability to tax. And so they can have a discussion. The representatives, the governors can have a conversation with the people and decide, hey, the federal government's funding this program, whether it's healthcare spending, subsidies for law enforcement, community development, block grants. These things are all going to start shrinking on the federal spending side. And states and counties and cities will have to decide if they want to pick up the slack or if it's time for government to stop funding those things. Anyways, this also subsidies, it reduces market pressure to lower costs in healthcare. So the healthcare costs for everyone else go up when you subsidize it for some people. It drives insurers to raise prices because the government pays for these prices. It's kind of like what's going on with education in America. All these institutions of higher learning have massively increased their costs because people can borrow money like candy. Everyone's got a bunch of money. So that's a bad idea. Anyways, California, it's a big impact. They're estimating there's about 1.7 million people affected. But these are not cuts. Again, these are just restoring people to where they were back in 2020 before the subsidies went into place in the first place. So it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you believe in your heart that it's okay for people today to live off of money that people are going to have to pay back tomorrow. I know this is a lot of people's philosophy is, I don't care about the national debt. It has had no impact on me whatsoever. But the reality is, it makes everything more expensive, and especially the interest payments. Did you know that this year alone, the federal government will make more payments in interest on the national debt than they will spend funding the entire Defense Department? And those numbers are only going to grow and grow and grow. So the one big beautiful bill had a lot of things in it that I think were good, especially if you believe in dynamic scoring and the fact that if you lower taxes, you invigorate the economy, which brings in more revenue in the private sector and more revenue to government. But it had some good things in it. And one of those good things was restoring fiscal sanity. The reality is all of Obamacare, not just these little enhancements, but all of Obamacare, all of these middle-class subsidies for healthcare were rammed through in, I think, 2014 under, obviously, President Obama. And it was a full-on partisan ram through. I seem to recall maybe there was one member of Congress from like Mississippi or Louisiana who was a Republican who voted for it. But otherwise, every Republican in the Senate, every Republican in the House voted against Obamacare. They shoved it through anyway. And, at some level, I have some admiration because they did it knowing they would probably lose Congress doing that. And they did for a while. Eventually, they got it back again. So here's what I would say. Those people who want to make it out like it's Republicans that have shut down the government and not the Democrats, they have no idea what they're talking about because all Republicans have said is, let's fund the government. Let's keep everything going for a continuing resolution while we get these operational area bills through their various committees of jurisdiction, get a negotiation going and get an actual budget done the right way to the president. And it's Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer who are acting like last November a Republican president get elected. They're acting like last November Republicans didn't retain the U.S. Senate. They're acting like last November Republicans didn't retain the House. And the reality is they did all three things. And so to sit there as Democrats and demand that we're going to shut down government if you don't go back and relitigate spending cuts from earlier this year and restore the temporary COVID enhancements that were supposed to end at the end of COVID, but we extended them because we're Democrats and we just think that healthcare should be a human right and not a consumer product. They have it all jacked up. So I would encourage you, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, to do a few things. One, reach out to your member of Congress and your senator. And if they're a Democrat, tell them to vote to fund the government and open it back up. And if they're a Republican, tell them they're doing the right thing. That's one thing I would do. And then the second thing I would do is if you're watching this on Substack, I would like it and restack it at the bottom, maybe even with a note. If you're watching it on YouTube, I would subscribe. I would share it. If it's on Spotify or Apple Podcast, Overcast, just spread the word. But that having been said, that's the real scoop. That's what's going on. And if anybody asks you, the answer is Democrats are trying to pretend they won the last election when they didn't. And they're asking for the government to continue funding COVID era spending when COVID is long over. That's what I got to say. Go Dodgers.